Welcome to part 7 of the 2007 Mackyard Incident Series. In this video, we are going to be looking at what I would term Transport Canada's complete and total negligence causing deaths in the rail industry. In the previous video, when we got to page 20, I said that this particular paragraph, in my opinion, had so many deceptions that it would take its own video. I think it's actually going to take me a couple of videos to get through all of this, but bear with me and you'll see why that is. But again, let's go through this paragraph pertaining to qualification standards and training of operating crews. It says in the 2007 report titled Stronger Ties, Assured Commitment to Railway Safety, the Railway Safety Act Review Panel made the following observations. Okay, it says the Railway Employee Qualification Standards for Operating Crew Regulation, known as QSOC, has been in effect since March 16th, 1987. Couple of things here. I have never seen the QSOC referred to as a regulation. This is the first time I actually see this mentioned to be a regulation. But the fact is that if you do a search on that, and we're going to look at that, nothing comes up really in a search engine pertaining to qualification standards for operating crews, or QSOC. Now here's my issue with this. It's that just as in a database pull, if you have the wrong date, it's not going to pull the information you're looking for. So if the death is not the right date for the death, you're not going to pull the information you're really looking for, and certainly not all of it. And it's the same thing if you give the wrong name for a regulation. Is this really a regulation called the Railway Employee Qualification Standards for Operating Crews Regulation? Or is this maybe the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation, which is SOR 87-150, which also came in effect in March of 1987. So we're going to be looking at this, and then it states, although the regulation has not been updated since it was implemented. That's key. That's 38 years ago, folks. It contains provisions to ensure that the training and certification of locomotive crews are being maintained at significantly high levels. I would beg to disagree. There have been a lot of deaths in the rail industry, and I think a lot of them would have been preventable. And the more you read these reports, the more you see the problems with these reports. And the lies and the deceptions, but we'll move on. But it also says qualification standards for operating crews also outlines the requirements for an instructor responsible for training and certifying candidates for a position specified in the regulations. Again, I'm thinking that this is really the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation, not QSOC. And you can see why I believe that. It specifies that a training program must be filed with Transport Canada, Rail Safety Directorate, along with any changes or alterations to the program. I don't think that's in the regulation. It's certainly not in SOR 87-150. It only says that you need to notify Transport Canada within 90 days of implementation. This particular, it specifies training programs must be filed with Transport Canada, Rail Safety Directorate, along with changes or alterations to the program. That should say for prior approval, prior to field implementation. And that's not part of the regulation. That is part of the Railway Safety Act, sections 18 through 20. And we're going to be looking at that again. The other thing I want you to notice here is above my head where it says, remember, Transport Canada must sign off on Transportation Safety Board railway investigation reports. And so if this was the final report, which it was for the Mackyard incident of 2007, then Transport Canada had to agree with these statements, right? Or they would have corrected this. But that was not done. This is what was signed off on as the final report. And the reason I know that Transport Canada has to sign off on reports is because in the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney, the person that was contacted to review the draft railway investigation report was then Minister of Transportation Lisa Raitt. So they get to give their comments. And if something is inaccurate, such as the name maybe of a regulation, you would think they would pick that out and that they would correct that, correct? We'll see. But you do need to keep that in mind, that it very much appears the Transport Canada minister must review the information in these reports before they are released to the public. And so that's for accuracy, you know, in the interest of promoting rail safety, right? So if you see here in my search engine, I looked for Canada Rail Qualification Standards for Operating Crews, which is the document name that we are provided with on page 20 of the Mackyard Incident Report. And folks, I have looked for this, you know, Qualification Standards for Operating Crews document many, many times, and you just don't find it. So what does come up is the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation, which is SOR 87-150. It is not this QSOC that comes up. And so why are we being given this name that seems to be a really old reference to a document that it doesn't even appear people even use in the rail industry, other than maybe, you know, a Transportation Safety Board or Transport Canada to confuse the reader, because you're given this document name, but what if it's the wrong one? You know, how are you going to find what you're really looking for? And I have worked on these issues, folks, for years, and I have yet to find a document, a regulation entitled the Qualification Standards for Operating Crews Regulation. So the regulation that does come up when you do that search, again, is the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation. And you can see the top red arrow here points to SOR 87-150. SOR stands for Statutory Orders and Regulations. 87 is the year, and 150 was the number for this particular regulation. But you just have to love the deception here, because in the bottom arrow, it shows that this is current until August of 2025. And, you know, this document has not been updated since 1987. This is the document that Chrystia Freeland is now in the process of overhauling because it has to do with frontline training programs for railway employees. But this document, folks, is over 38 years old. They make it look like it's current by adding that little date there at the bottom, but this document has not changed in 38 years. And it does not include an occupational category for training for belt pack operator, for rail traffic control, or for track maintenance worker. There is no standard regulation that applies to those three categories of workers. How long have belt pack operations been in use in the rail industry? For decades. There is simply no excuse for not having belt pack as part of this regulation. And the same for rail traffic control. And I would say track maintenance too, especially now that it's a job that's much more involved because of things like hot boxes, all the signals, everything that those guys have to maintain. It's not just a matter of put rails down with ties and you're done. It's not. You know, there's automatic switches, there's all kinds of things that these guys have to maintain. And so there should be standardized training for track maintenance workers, as much as Chrystia Freeland doesn't seem to want to give it to them, even though they're asking for it in her overhaul that is now going on for this particular regulation. And I would tell you folks, if you are a rail investor, a rail customer, a member of the public, you should be contacting Chrystia Freeland and telling her to include not only training for belt pack and rail traffic controllers in this regulation overhaul, she needs to include track maintenance workers because of hot box issues, signals, switches, whatever. They're asking for the regulation. They want to be included in that standardized training. Tell me, Chrystia Freeland, why you are not giving them that opportunity. We don't have another 38 years for Transport Canada to get it right. If you look at the very top here, the red arrow, the very first one at the top says the Railway Safety Act. And you can see that I took that from Justice for the Government of Canada website for the Minister of Justice. So under the Railway Safety Act, the enabling act, that's the enabling act for all of these regulations that are made under this particular act. And if you look here, the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation, or SOR 87-150, was not originally under the Railway Safety Act. It actually was under the Canadian Transportation Act. And there is a huge issue when it comes to enforcement of key regulations when it comes to that, because the Canadian Transportation Agency can be headed by rail executives like Jeffrey Hare, who oversaw that agency for, let's see, from February 2007 till I think February 2015. That would include the Mackyard incident, the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney, and that bogus attempt to overhaul the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation, the first attempt. And we're going to get into that issue also. But that came out of the Mackyard, that first attempt to overhaul training programs for frontline railway employees came out of the Mackyard incident of 2007. And so that resulted, in my opinion, in a complete and total public scam. And now Chrystia Freeland, 18 years later, she's on the ball. She's going to be overhauling that regulation for us. I have a real issue with Chrystia Freeland making it look like she's so on the ball. She's going to be overhauling this. Everything that woman is probably using is because I submitted it to the Government of Canada through my thousands of pages, my thousands of hours of research. But hey, she can make it look like it's her own, right? That woman, in my opinion, a former reporter for the Washington Post, Fake News Freeland, as I like to call her, not too much on the ball, even though she likes to pretend that she is. But folks, I'm the one who did the thousands and thousands and years of research in these matters, not Chrystia Freeland. So anyways, if you look here, you can see where the green arrow is on the left. There is no Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation under the Railway Safety Act as the enabling act for all these regulations. And you'll also note that you do not see a regulation called Qualification Standards for Operating Crews, or QSOC, which would happen to be at the same spot. If it was there, it would also be before the R's. LMNOP so Q would be there after the P if it was there, Qualification Standards Regulation, but that too is not there. And if that was indeed a current regulation that had not been changed since 1987, as we are told in that paragraph on page 20 of the Mackyard Incident Report, you should be seeing that regulation, QSOC, somewhere. We don't. And I have looked for that document for years and have yet to find it. So I think that when they're talking about QSOC, they are really talking about SOR 87-150, the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation, and it is a great way to confuse the public. And, because you're there wondering, what's this they're talking about? And the average person's not going to spend a lot of time looking for this stuff or trying to figure it out. They're just not. The other thing I want you to notice here is that the regulations tied to safety management systems show a date of 2015. That's the red arrow, okay? Not 2001, which is the actual date to which that regulation dates back. So what they're doing in the background here, and the public, most of them are not any wiser to it, is, okay, we're going to repeal this. It dates back to 2001. We're going to make it look like it really is only 2015. Is the public going to know any better? The average person? Probably not. But safety management systems, regulations, or acts, and the requirement to have those systems in place date back to 2001. And even in 2018, 2019 timeframe, Transport Canada was still finding it to be a challenge to have this regulation or this documentation, this critical documentation in place with Canadian rail carriers. Just more Transport Canada not doing its job. And people are dying over these issues because Transport Canada has completely fallen in its oversight role. Didn't do proper audits to make sure people weren't being fake qualified, and then they're there to help provide appropriate death cover-ups, being a real partner in crime instead of going after people who are violating so many laws. If you look here again at the top, I'm showing the Railway Safety Act as the enabling act for regulations that were also repealed under this act. And again, you're not seeing the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation. That would fall under the second arrow, where the second arrow there is in the green. And you're not seeing the qualification standards for operating crews regulation. And if that had been repealed, you'd be seeing it here. But we were told again in, the Railway Investigation Report for the Mackyard incident of 2007 that qualification standards regulation for operating crews has never been updated or repealed. Where is it? It's not in the active regulation, and it is not in the repealed regulation under the Railway Safety Act. In this screen print, this is taken from the Canadian Transportation Agency website. That's not Transport Canada. It's not the Transportation Safety Board. It is this outside agency that can be headed by the likes of rail executives such as Jeffrey Hare. So this particular screen print, if you see at the top arrow there, it shows OTC or CTA.gc.ca. So this is an agency of the Government of Canada, but it's basically putting the fox in charge of the hen house when you have people who could be rail executives overseeing key rail legislation or regulations that have to do with railway employee qualification standards and training programs for railway employees on the front lines. Because, if you're a rail executive like Jeffrey Hare, are you really going to be wanting to do all proper audits to make sure that railway employees aren't being fake qualified, as maybe they are? And let's not forget, during this time frame, you have the CEO of CPKC, who was then the CN Rail Chief Operating Officer. That would be Keith Creel. He was the CN Chief Operating Officer at the time that we had the backyard incident. He then left CN Rail in early 2013, which is also when Jeffrey Hare was still overseeing the Canadian Transportation Agency. And, you know, Jeffrey Hare was a CP executive. And he went back to CP when he left the Canadian Transportation Agency. So, geez, are you going to be bringing, to light the fact that maybe your CEO might be engaging in violations of laws? More on that when I mean, there was definitely fake qualifications going on when Keith Creel was Chief Operating Officer for CN Rail. And then when he went on to CP, I would argue they were violating laws when it came to managers at the controls and issues like that too. And we're going to get into the issue of managers at the controls in another series, which I will be doing. Kind of eye-opening again. But anyway, so that's the issue. You have the fox in charge of the hen house. It is not in their interest, if the Canadian Transportation Agency is headed by a rail executive, it's not in their interest to be doing compliance audits on an ongoing basis or even ever. Is it in their interest to make sure that the railway employee training programs were properly overhauled when they did their first attempt after the Mackyard incident? Absolutely not. That would cost their companies money, So, but if you look here, it says under the red line there, very eye-opening. It says the CTA, or Canadian Transportation Agency, has primary responsibility for carrying out the provisions of the Canada Transportation Act. Primary responsibility. It also shares responsibility for the following laws, and one of those is the Railway Safety Act. They share that responsibility with Transport Canada, but they have primary responsibility for overseeing anything that would fall under the Canada Transportation Act. Okay, so here again, if you look at the top, you can see that this is again taken from the Canadian Transportation Agency website. And what I find particularly troubling is a statement like what's underlined here at the top in red. The Canadian Transportation Agency has sole responsibility for the following regulations. Sole responsibility. Okay, well, we're not seeing two things here. Again, where is the qualification standards for operating crews regulations? If it's a current regulation, as we are told on page 20 of the Mackyard Incident Report. It should be somewhere. It wasn't under the Railway Safety Act, and it's not under the Canadian Transportation Act either. Something looks kind of fishy here. And then we're also not seeing the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation, or SOR 87-150. That would be where the red arrow is at the bottom there. We're not seeing it. Why not? I'll show you why not. Okay, so this is another page from the Canadian Transportation Agency website. And again, no qualification standards for operating crews anywhere on that page, and no Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation, or SOR 87-150. So we're not seeing either of those names for regulations under the Railway Safety Act or under the Canadian Transportation Act. Seems kind of weird, but luckily I take a lot of screen prints and I save them. So let's see where this really was. Okay, so again, we saw that the Canadian Transportation Agency has primary responsibility for enforcement of the Canada Transportation Act and also for the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation, or SOR 87-150, which fell under that act. And these two screen prints are per a presentation I had done about a year ago in August of 2024. One of the many that I believe I had shared with the Government of Canada. The first screen print at the top there, again from the CTA website, shows that Jeffrey Hare was the chair from February 12, 2007 to February 11, 2015. And again, that would include the Mackyard incident, the attempt to overhaul training programs for frontline rail workers, the first attempt, a total public scam, and it would include the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney, and any other deaths and any other rail incidents that might be due to fake qualifications in the rail industry. Now, the bottom screen is clearly the important one. You can see there that the green arrow shows the Canadian Transportation Agency is the enabling act. And look at what's above that with the first red arrow, the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation. I included this screen print in a presentation that I did in 2024. But today, you no longer see the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation under the Canadian Transportation Act, as we saw in previous screens in this video. So it has quietly been removed from here, from having the fox in charge of the hen house. When I told that in that presentation to Transport Canada, they have now removed it from the Canadian Transportation Agency and the Enabling Act being the Canadian Transportation Act, as you can see with the green arrow here. And let's see where it's kind of migrating. Okay, so here's the issue, folks. Now, again, we didn't see the qualification standards for operating crews on either the Railway Safety Act as the Enabling Act or the Canadian Transportation Act as here for regulation. If you look at the blue arrow on the bottom here, it should be down here if it was still a current regulation. And same thing for the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation, SOR 87-150. It's not under the Canadian Transportation Agency. The green arrow here would be where you would see that. So here's the thing. It's not showing up under the current Railway Safety Act, and it's not under the Canadian Transportation Act. Clearly, Transport Canada has removed it from where it was, because we did see that regulation under the Canadian Transportation Act in the previous screen, that was the Enabling Act. But it's been removed from there since I took that screen print last year, because, well, you know, I don't care what Transport Canada says. They can say that the Canadian Transportation Agency has sole responsibility for certain regulations, but the fact is, if you're an agency of the Government of Canada, it's ultimately Transport Canada and the Government of Canada who is responsible for anything that goes wrong. And any violations of laws, we're not doing our audits as we're supposed to do, any deaths that result from all of this, negligence, in my humble opinion. Agency law is quite clear that the higher level will take responsibility. So they can say Canadian Transportation Agency was responsible, had sole responsibility at one time for the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation, or SOR 87-150. And if the QSOC was there too, can't find that thing anywhere. But anyway, I think it's really SOR 87-150 that they're talking about, and they're just trying to confuse the public by using this other older name. But anyway, or a name that's just used within the industry maybe, but works well. Confuse the public, and you know, we can get away with our lies and our deceptions, right? And as they have done literally for decades. They never anticipated that somebody would look into these issues, that the parent of a frontline rail worker would spend so much time, literally thousands of hours and years of their lives, looking into these issues in order to protect their own child from the corrupt government of Canada. Okay, so this screen print is from the Canada Gazette, which is the official publication of the Government of Canada. And it has to do with the current overhaul or attempted overhaul by Chrystia Freeland, who is now Minister of Transportation, trying to overhaul the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation. She's going to call it the Railway Personnel Training and Qualification Regulations. Note at the bottom here, the statutory authority is the Railway Safety Act. So she's quietly taking it away from the Canadian Transportation Agency and the Canadian Transportation Act and migrating it to the Railway Safety Act, which is where I told them it really belonged. Not under the fox in charge of the hen house, that it belonged under the Railway Safety Act. And so that's where we're going to be migrating this key regulation and attempting to overhaul frontline rail worker training programs. Let's hope it's not another BS attempt on the part of Transport Canada. The look of making it look like we're really doing something, but using it as an opportunity to water down regulations and key laws and provisions for frontline rail workers and their safety. And in my humble opinion, I kind of think that's what they're going to be doing, but that's just me. We'll be looking at this, and I will be keeping a very close eye on Minister Freeland's overhaul of key regulation having to do with frontline rail worker training programs. She can be sure that this one is gonna be on my radar as a parent. And again, if she doesn't include those track maintenance workers in her new regulation, any track maintenance worker that dies given all these issues that I've documented, in my opinion, Chrystia Freeland herself should be sued for breach of public trust. And we're not going to get into all the financial fraud and all of that as the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance of Canada lying to the public, right? For years, right? Fake news, Freeland? You know what? I have zero respect for some of these people, and it's for good reason. So I just took the two screen prints here, the one from the Minister of Justice, the law showing that the Enabling Act used to be the Canadian Transportation Act for the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation. And now the Government of Canada is quietly moving that over to the Railway Safety Act so that it no longer falls under the fox in charge of the hen house. And whose fault was that for putting it there in the first place? Did you honestly think, Transport Canada, that rail carriers weren't going to be bending the rules to their favor? Weren't going to be turning a blind eye to fake qualifications? Weren't going to be enforcing the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation? Did you honestly think, when their primary concern as rail executives, former and future rail executives like Jeffrey Hare, that they would be causing their companies and their CEOs headaches with, more costs for training of frontline rail workers and for doing compliance audits to ensure they're not being fake qualified, and on and on and on? Whose fault was it for putting the fox in charge of the hen house? Look no further than Transport Canada and the Government of Canada. And now they know that they've been caught. And that's why Chrystia Freeland is now Minister of Transportation. You know, she's real buddy-buddy with Mark Carney, who is her son's godfather. He's the current Prime Minister of Canada. So kind of seems like everybody thinks that's a demotion to go from Deputy Prime Minister under Justin Trudeau and Minister of Finance to just little Minister of Transportation. Oh, but the liabilities can be massive, and so it's going to be Chrystia Freeland to the rescue for the government of Canada, right? What a joke. In my opinion, you know where that woman belongs. Okay, so this is going to end part 7 of the 2007 Mackyard Incident series, looking at Transport Canada's complete and total negligence causing death, in my humble opinion. And we're going to continue this discussion pertaining to the deception in that one paragraph on page 20 of the Mackyard Incident Transportation Safety Board report. We will continue that in part 8. So on that note, have a great day, and I will see you on the next one.